You're listening to Season 2 of the Mies podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show.
With every stroke of the pencil, I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
Today's show is a little bit of a divergence from what you typically hear, except it's also not, in that it's about learning and creating an innovation. Our guest today is Ellen Cassidy. She's the founder of Elemental Prep. Well, it's actually a company that teaches folks how to take the LSAT. I know you're probably thinking, why the heck do I have someone on the podcast who teaches the LSAT? Well, I met Ellen through this CEO group that I'm a part of, and I heard her helping folks with this problem, a problem that I had also sort of posed to the group of, hey, how do you remember things? I read books all the time, and I so often forget things that I have to reread these books over and over and over. And Ellen started talking about what she does. And although what she does on the surface is teach the LSATs, she's really invented this creative and innovative way to retain information. And we're going to talk about very tactically how that works today. I also learned a lot more about her background in prep for this podcast, which is a pretty incredible story. She's a Stanford grad, turned down Harvard Law many times, but from a background that you would never expect to be in the realm of that. And of course, like many, has gone through many struggles to get where she is today. But generally speaking, we spend most of the time talking about this process of what I call information retention. And it's sort of these few steps that she'll talk about in much better sort of clarity than I do, which is essentially like translating the thing that you learn to yourself, quipping, which is kind of creating sort of an analogy or your way of putting spin on it, and then the intonation in which you say that, among many other things. But really, it's a way to help you remember what you learn. And I thought that everyone would get a ton of value out of hearing from Ellen and hearing how this process works, because if you're like me, you love to learn new things. And what sucks is when you forget the new things that you learned. So hopefully this helps everybody remember a little bit more of what you learned, and not just remember, but actually retain and be able to index that and go back to it later. So I had a blast. I think that everyone, no matter if you're a chef or a restaurant owner or a mixologist or anybody listening to this show, you will get a lot of value out of it. You should definitely check out her website and just follow her. And she, at some point, will be working on just a more global solution that is directed towards just generally retaining information. But you can learn a lot just by, reading her book as well, which we talk about in the show. So I learned a lot. I always love catching up with Ellen, so this was just a great opportunity to chat again. And as always, I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. I am damn excited to have you.
Really? Oh,
yes.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I was so flattered to be asked. I was like, oh, yeah.
I've been looking forward to this for a while because, and obviously our audience is, restaurants, chefs, food, hospitality, restaurant tech, maybe some like food investors, that kind of thing. And so when they see this, we're like, why the heck do you have an LSAT teacher
reading
on here?
Therapist.
And, for me, like if you replace, LSAT with information retention.
Yeah.
That's what the first time I met you, I was like, holy shit. Like she's teaching people how to retain information.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really like, selfishly, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this again. I mean, basically we're just going to have part of our same conversation from last time, plus some more, and we'll get a little more personal because why not? So I can selfishly learn more about that. But, for context, for everybody that's listening, like I saw you on some sort of thread in this, like, what do we call this? Like a mastermind CEO group thing that we're in?
CEO group. I mean, it's Hampton. We could say Hampton, right?
It's great. But I saw you and I was like, I saw you answering something and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to learn about that because, and I said this to you, I read all the time, but I end up reading the same book like 5 or 6 times because I'm like, fuck, I forgot half of these things. And you've already helped me a bunch. And like, so I do some of this already, like the, translation and quipping, which we're gonna talk about. So we're gonna talk a lot about that today because I just want the whole audience of our world to hear this, because it's not just for LSATs, it's for, I think, because I've been using it for anything. Like I use it just when I'm out and about and I have an idea and I want to remember it. So anyways, we're going to talk about that today. If it's cool with you, what I didn't know is more about your background.
Yeah.
Which is pretty, incredible. And also, there's definitely some trauma there that maybe like speaks to why you do what you do. But from what I understand, this was not what you set out to do with your life, but you were at a party and something happened where you were in some conversation and then like you went home and bought the Power Score, books to start learning about, how to prep for the LSAT. And then fast forward, you created this company, Elemental Prep. If it's cool with you, I also want to talk a little bit about like your childhood, because I didn't realize, about, growing up with a single father and, so the addiction in your family, because I have to imagine that probably has an impact on a lot of the things that you're doing today.
Oh, it definitely does. I feel like I learn more and more every day, all the ways in which it does have an effect, and it does, make me who I am. But no, definitely.
Do you mind if we start there and just a little background? I mean, from what I understand, your mom was an addict, and that, led down a path of a lot more trauma. And then I think you left your house at a pretty young age. But maybe if you could just add some color to.
She left my house, but yes, no, I'll tell the story. So
yes.
Up until I was 5, I had, a pretty idyllic childhood out in Western Pennsylvania, because basically my family had gone out into the middle of nowhere and it's like a detox. And so then my mom had no access to anything. And so then, that was a fine 5 years. And then we moved to Philadelphia, where, the crowd is a little bit different and that kind of thing. And just from the ages of like 5 to 11, I kind of saw her like fall back into that life. But of course, I didn't truly understand a lot of this. And like, it's funny because when I talk about it now, I talk a lot about drugs, but actually the drugs part was pretty invisible to me. I didn't really understand that as like a 7-year-old. The thing that was like very omnipresent to me was her eating disorder. And I was very involved in, as like a little kid trying to, micromanage and help and coach her through, beating this eating disorder that she had, or like various other addictions and things. And I look back now at how I was 8 and I was so invested in her success with this eating disorder stuff. And I look back, I mean, it was very irresponsible of her to make me as invested in it as I was. But I look back of that kind of buy-in to, I have to make this person succeed no matter what. I care about their goals more than my goals. Like, I live to make them better. I can see the shadow of it a lot in how I work now, of like, why is it so easy for me to care so much about students, so much about making people's dreams come true? And it's like, well, there was one person that I never got to save, because, my mom disappeared when I was 11, then came back and had, outbursts and random things like that, where you're just seeing her, she'd be there for like 15 minutes and yell and scream and get arrested and leave. And you'd be like, oh. But she overdosed on heroin when I was in my early 20s.
That's crazy. Were you already in school, in college when that happened?
Yeah, I was actually out of college. So it was when I was applying to law school. And so, funnily enough, Columbia Law School was harassing me about not wanting to give me financial aid because I couldn't get financial information from my mom, who I hadn't spoken to in years and had no income and all this stuff. And I was going back and forth with them on that, and they were saying I needed documentation to prove and all of this, and I didn't have it. And I was feeling so ostracized. And then I found out that she passed away right then, as I was making that decision on whether or not I was going to go to law school.
Wow. That's how you found out?
Yeah, no, my dad called me, and like, I often struggle with how, like, am I cold? Am I a bad person? Because, by the time that happened, I had my grieving for a lot of years, that like the time when I was really losing her was those 6 years from when I was 5 to 11.
Yeah.
When I was trying and trying and trying so hard to save her. And like, she was a person I trusted more than anyone in the world. And losing that was my real loss. And by the time she passed away, I had 13 years of the person that I loved was gone. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And also, my wife has a similar story with her mom, not with heroin addiction, but very similar. And also, not being able to get power of attorney and things like this. It's traumatic. It's also like you feel a little bit powerless, like there's things you can't do, and also I'm sure angry and things like that. So that was while you were in school, you found that out, and then it was passed after college.
Yeah.
And you ended up going to Stanford, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I honestly, the biggest like turning point moment in my life was the moment I got into Stanford when I was 17. Because I had been expelled from high school for starting a gay prom like less than 6 months before that happened. And so
Isn't that crazy they expelled you for that? Like nowadays it would be
nowadays it would be very different.
That whole school would be canceled.
Exactly. Oh God. Cancel culture would have had a field day with the Academy of Notre Dame. But I was obsessed with getting into Stanford my entire childhood. That was like all I wanted. And the idea that, okay, you're going to have to check the box saying, you were expelled or suspended or committed a felony, like, girl, this isn't good. And the fact that it came through anyway, I mean, it really felt like I cheated death.
It's amazing that I didn't know you could get into Stanford after being expelled.
Neither did I.
I mean, that's pretty nuts. I remember, actually, I just remembered this, but when I was in high school, I went to high school in Virginia, and I was on the wrestling team, and I dyed my hair blonde. I don't know, we did that on the wrestling team. And there was an article in the Washington Post about like me going to culinary school, and it had me, and it was like Sharkey cooks off the mat or something like that. And it was me with blonde hair, and they pulled me out of school, and they said, you can't wrestle again, and we're taking you out of class until you dye your hair back.
What?
And there was a cosmetology department in the school, and I had to leave class to go get my hair dyed back. My mom was pissed. I actually forgot about that. It's crazy though, like what schools would, totally secular.
I know.
Schools are secular. Most of them are.
Oh, I mean, there's a reason I never became a K through 12 teacher, even despite loving teaching, that like, I gotta live my own rules. Like I can't have a boss. I gotta do what I want to do and have my laboratory.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
I heard something when we were scouting this out that someone told you, because you got into Harvard and you turned them down a bunch of times and ended up going to Stanford, and your friend, I think,
for
told
law
you.
School. Not quite. I got into Harvard Law School and deferred 3 times before saying
I don't know what that means. I went to culinary school. I have no idea what that means. I heard Harvard, it's Harvard. But like a friend of yours said, which I thought was really poignant, like if there's anything else you can see yourself doing other than coming here, definitely do that. What did they tell you that?
Oh, I mean, well, his point was, and I really need to thank this guy. His name is Connor, and he's a great guy. His point was, this is the only thing.
You've said that twice now, by the way. So I think we got to shoot this person at least a social media note and say, Connor, thank you.
No, I really need to thank Connor. No, I feel really bad that I haven't, to be honest.
I mean, you have technically just now, but.
He's been thanked now on podcasts.
Yeah. Anyways.
And he's a great lawyer in Seattle. He said, Ellen, like, I'm here at Harvard Law School. He was a 3L at the time. Like, this is the only thing I ever could see myself being happy doing, like being an attorney. That is all I've wanted. It's my plan. It is my life. And it's hard for me to get through this. And for you, I know that the people here would kill your spirit. Like, your vibe is not their vibe. And I took it really seriously because, like, we lived in the same co-op at Stanford for a couple of years. So he knew me pretty well. And I mean, honestly, Connor was right. And then going and teaching that first LSAT class afterward and giving it a chance to like it really completely changed my life. I'm so grateful that I did not go and that I did eventually turn them down like 3 years later.
What specifically, because you didn't want to be an attorney or because of the environment at Harvard Law? Like, what do you mean specifically?
Like, I loved the admit weekend I had at Harvard Law. It's nothing in particular against them. It's much more that I love what I do. And I'm so called to, unlocking reading and critical thinking for people. Like, I love working with people directly. Like I said, I love my laboratory. I love making new things. I like that to me is play. And I didn't want to make a $300,000 bet. I would like being a big law lawyer more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it really came down to.
Yeah. That's super smart. You're lucky also that you knew that early enough that you can make that decision.
Right.
Okay. So we're going to get into the meat of a bunch of this because this is selfishly, again, this is me just kind of like taking up your time again to learn again. We'll probably reiterate a bunch of stuff I learned. But generally speaking, you have this process through your company, Elemental Prep, of where you help folks take the LSAT. And what I interpret it as, you just help people understand how to ingest and retain information through these practices that you have. And I definitely have seen where it's helpful just if I'm reading a book and I want to remember a premise, if I'm out and I have an idea, and of course, just sort of learning. What's funny is I reread Benjamin Franklin's biography by Walter Isaacson, and he did this. This is something he did. So in the book, there's a chapter where he talks about like part of his learning process was he would read something and then he would reiterate it in his own words. And that's how he learned.
I have to find this in this biography.
Oh yeah,
that is
I'll send you let me
unbelievable.
make a note. I'll send you the page number and everything because I actually wrote it down. I'm sure I have it somewhere, but I'm not going to waste our time on this.
That's so cool.
That was his practice. I was reading it and I was like, he does what Ellen does.
That's so cool.
So anyways, without further ado, can you just talk about like this whole process of what we're going to call it, at least for the context of this conversation, retaining information and all the steps and sort of how it works?
Yeah. So I will tell you how it originated, of what I see the problem as and how I solve the problem of retaining information. So when I was teaching the LSAT, I basically teach people how to do little riddles that are nothing to do with the legal profession. They're tiny little paragraphs about lemurs and do they go out at night, things like that. It's actually very fun. But one of the primary difficulties that people have in trying to improve their LSAT score that in 2015 or whatever, I did not know how to solve is people do not, when they read something, actually really understand it to the depth that they need to, which means the ability to actually work with it in their own analytical memory and retain that information for, whatever period of time it's needed. And so I saw this in my tutoring. I had like an experience where I told a girl, read that paragraph, and then I covered it. I said, what does that say? And she did not know what it said, even a second after reading it. And so I was like, okay, this has to be solved. And so it's been almost 10 years now of research on this process of getting it to work. I created a system called RTQ, which stands for Read, Translate, Quip. And that first step, which is the similar to Benjamin Franklin's step of like reading and then translating, when you're reading information, you want to be coding it with emotions by intoning the words as you say them. Like here, I have the login information of like, you can join the show to record here. Like, notice there's a music to that versus a monotone, like, you can join the show to record here. No one can remember a monotone. And when we read in a monotone, we're basically asking our brains to retain the single most boring, difficult to retain type of thing in the world. And so you can make it a lot easier to retain by like giving the words that music in the read stage. But then when you translate after you read, you say what you just read back to yourself without looking at it in your own words. And then this allows you to actually process that information enough that it can be yours. You've put it through your own filter, not to get rid of information, but to make it your own. And then it stays much better. And then the last stage of the process is the quip. So after you put the information in your own words, you say something about it to yourself. And it could even be just a laugh. It could be a snarky joke. It could be an example. It could be, oh, that reminds me of that time, or, oh, come on. It doesn't have to be some kind of groundbreaking thesis, but it gets you in that habit of responding and creating a conversation with everything you read. And the idea that like neurons that fire together wire together, that when you recruit other parts of your brain into the action, it's just going to stay without you having to brute force memorize it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like, putting it into action without actually being there, which I I found out was very helpful, especially like the intonation, changing the intonation, and then also this quip helped me a lot because, when you learn a craft, let's say, and you learn how to cook, and you want to learn how to brunoise a shallot, or you want to learn how to, make a gastrique or something, you make it. You're there. You do it. You see it. You feel it. And also, there's sort of this just-in-time versus just-in-case information. If you see that happen, and then like a month later you're supposed to make it, you probably won't remember. But if you do it a bunch of times, you're more likely to remember. But you can't do that all the time, especially if you're reading, and you're sort of doing something in theory that later you want to put into practice. There isn't a good way. And this was a big unlock from what I was learning from you is it's like, oh, here's how you can do that, even if you're not going to,
mentally.
Because it's such a, especially, as a founder or as a business owner, like I'm always reading books about whatever, some premise. And I want to put that premise into action, but I can't, you can't put it into action like in that moment. I can't read about like a better way to, have a critical conversation with my team member and the ways in which to respond and then go do that. I have to read it and then a week later or a month later, go do it. And so like this process is so helpful, and it's interesting. I'm curious how you think about like the difference between, it's funny. It reminds me of Good Will Hunting. Remember that scene in the bar and he's like, Wood drastically underestimates the and he's like, the guy's like basically just like, repeating back words he read from Vickers, some book. I'm not smart enough to know what the hell that means, but like he's just saying the exact same thing that he read in a book. So probably doesn't understand it. Like, how do you help push people away from, and I'm sure with the LSATs, there are people that are just really good at remembering words as opposed to retaining information. Like, do you have things that you do to help combat that?
I mean, a lot of what I do is the process is made to confront that. Because if somebody is really good at just, I call it like word sounds or word skating or ghost reading. All of those are words for like what the problem you just described, where people are like, they want to memorize noises. And so what you do is really emphasize the quip stage and the intonation stage. That if somebody's just memorizing sounds, they aren't going to be able to quip. And the thing they'll always tell you, the key to diagnostics of RTQ problems is they'll be like, well, this is just this kind of thing. This is just a statement. You can't quip this. And I hear this probably 4 or 5 times a week. It's like, no, but Ellen, you can't quip that. And what I hear when I hear that statement is, I can't have an independent thought about that kind of information, which I mean, that's not the way the human brain works. That's just like a barrier they've placed in front of themselves for no reason. But if they really think there are certain types of statements for which you cannot have an independent thought or reaction, I mean, like you can just think about how deeply instantiated this problem really is. Like, if it's like muscle memory, it's like a locked muscle, like a frozen shoulder that they have believed they're just paralyzed, but they're actually really not.
Yeah, it's so funny. It actually, I wonder, this sounds like it would also solve the polarizing left versus right, where if you hear something on your side of the aisle, make yourself first translate it back, the notion that that everybody is saying, and see if you actually, resonate with it.
100%. That like in a debate, very often people, it's like they're just waiting to say their next pre-planned bullet point, but they aren't actually present in what they're doing at all, which like that level of presence where it's like the thing I am doing right now is the only thing I am doing. It is the only thing that matters. And I have to be fully in this mode, which I imagine when you're cooking something in like a high pressure situation, it has to be like that, right? Like your focus has to black everything out.
I mean, there are things that become rote where like you can perfectly, chop chives and talk to somebody once you know how and things like that.
Yeah.
But if you're seasoning a sauce, let's say, or something like that, you have to be focused on that thing at that time. Yeah, there's definitely instances of that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel like the context of this, could we like do an exercise?
Of course.
Where there's something that we're supposed to learn and then the way in which you would go and translate and quip.
Yeah. All right, what piece of text should I use? I can use a little passage from Marcus Aurelius if you want.
Oh,
Is that good?
There you go. Talking my language.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just open it up.
Are you a partaker of the Stoic philosophy?
I I like Marcus Aurelius. Am I a aficionado? No, I'm definitely not an aficionado. I'm a person who has read it and enjoyed it. But I also know, I feel like Marcus Aurelius is like the number one thing like a guy would like to understand at a high level. And so I sourced actually a few short passages from Marcus Aurelius to have as examples.
That's so funny that you say that, because a lot of the things sometimes I've heard people, call out some of the notions of Marcus Aurelius as toxic positivity and things like that.
But productivity has a bad reputation right now. So
yeah. I'm more of a Seneca than Epictetus, but anyways, let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. And so I will just kind of RTQ a couple of sentences for us here.
So read, translate, quip.
Read, translate, quip. RTQ. There we go. And I can send you this passage for you to have in the notes if you want. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. In the morning, when you rise unwillingly, let this thought be present. Okay, so when you're there in the morning and you're getting up and you're upset, so you don't want to wake up, like think about this, which is like, oh God, like hasn't everybody had that feeling? It's like you can feel the I'm rising out of the mud. I am rising to the work of a human being. Okay, I am getting up right now to go and do the work that a human being does. Like essentially, this is essential to my nature, what I am doing right now. And the muck that I am pulling out of, it's like letting me kind of rise to the sun. Why then am I dissatisfied if I'm going to do the things for which I exist and for which I was brought into the world? Okay, so like, why am I pissed off right now? I'm like doing the things that I am made to do. I was brought in the world to do these things. And so what are these feelings that I am carrying around? And it kind of makes you think like, is it really that important how bad I feel when I wake up? Or have I been made for this, to lie under the blankets and keep myself warm? Or is this my purpose? My purpose is to like sit here and be warm and be in bed and feel, the single best feeling on earth. But is feelings really the point of life? Like, probably not. And so I'll stop there. I'll pause and let us talk.
Well, what I'm hearing is it's a very short amount of information at a time that you're processing. So you're not reading an entire page and translating that. You're reading like almost a sentence or two at a time, which I imagine it's more relative to like, okay, where does it stop, the premise that they're talking about? But that also takes a lot of time. Like, so it probably takes 10 times longer to read a book, right?
So yes and no. I would say, it takes an Olympic athlete a different amount of time to run a mile than, Joe on the couch. And just because it's like this right now doesn't mean it's always like this. So, for instance, when I was reading things, throughout my life, I never knew that I was doing this automatically. I had no conscious awareness. But if you would have asked me at the end of that paragraph, Ellen, what happened? I sure as hell would have been able to tell you. Like, and to me, that would seem obvious that I would be able to tell you. Like, I never would have questioned my capability to do that. I took it completely for granted. But because reading is such a black box, we don't get any insight into what everyone else takes for granted, what's going on in everyone else's head, what process everyone else is enacting. And so I was doing a lot of what you just saw automatically without even knowing I was doing it. Yeah. And the difference between, someone who's doing it automatically, who's say like a top, 2% reader or something like that, and the rest of people, they just never learned the process. They never learned to get good at it so that they could join those elite readers. And so what I just demonstrated for you is like the out loud, unpacked, systematized version of how to practice this enough to get good enough at it that you start to translate without even realizing it. And so the quipping, honestly, the part where I'm like, doesn't seem so important now. Like, that's probably the only part I was doing really consciously back in the day. And that was the last part of my methodology to get added. I had no clue I was doing it. So much goes on hyper fast in our minds that we have like very little conscious awareness of. And so while we have to let it be slow in the beginning, that's only because we are toddlers and we have to let ourselves toddle for a while. Yeah.
That's a verb. But then, I didn't know that. Toddle's a verb.
Maybe.
That's a great verb if it is. I love that. What's funny is I think I also have done a fair amount of that when I read. But the problem is is that what I'll do is I'll actually just say it to my wife, who I'm like sitting next, because I always read at night in bed. And I'll be reading, and like every 2 minutes, like, I went through this long phase of the universe and, physics and all these things. I was reading like Brian Greene and things. And every page I would be like, Hannah, did you know that? And she's like, dude, chill. It's 11 o'clock at night. But I would have to like talk to her about this, mostly because I was excited, but then also I would like remember and, because I would say it after I'd read a page. So what's interesting here is that it also, I think, I don't know if you think about this, but like fostering a community of other people that are learning the same thing, to do this translating and quipping is probably really helpful too, because you then have to say it to others. Like, here's what I read, here's what,
Yeah. And part of my goals is like, I really do want to port this as like a course, a system, a community for people outside of LSAT. Cause like, as you can see, it's very applicable. It doesn't actually have to change at all. And, I have 10 years of knowledge of this in the field of how it works with like very willing participants, that it would be so, so cool if, kids, professionals had the ability to practice all of this and bring themselves up to that elite level just through training and like, trying it out. But, the future.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you're totally right. And there's just so many applications for it. Even something as mundane as when you're learning, when you have to train a team on HR things, right? And it's like, there's a handbook. Nobody fucking reads the handbook.
No,
and
it's so true.
Nobody remembers any of those things. But if you have to take a test, you got to memorize the day before and then you forget it the next day.
Yep.
But this is probably a really good way to like, if you in a group, if you all do that together and you talk about like, hey, this is our core value. Can you repeat back to me in your own words why that's,
That would be perfect. And tell us what you think about it too. Like having them actualize that information, because like within Elemental, it really is a community. Like we have a channel in our Slack called Translation Checks, and where people post what they did. And, it's like, oh, was that good? Was it bad? And they get feedback and work together, which is really, really helpful.
Yeah. One thing as I was working on this more that I realized that I started getting really self-conscious about is I feel like note-taking is a terrible practice while I read, because it's almost like this lazy, like, and I catch myself doing it all the time where I would read right away, write down the thing. And then basically I'm just saying, okay, I'm not going to remember that anymore. And then maybe I'll go back to that note without context. And then it's all this extra work to try to create context and,
Exactly. It's like it divorces it from context. And like, I take a lot of notes when I'm in tutoring. For instance, if I'm working with somebody and they are giving me, a 10-minute monologue on every single thing, what I'll be doing is I'll be looking at them and my fingers will be moving, that I'll be writing down every single thing that's going on in my own words. And in a way, I feel like that's my form of translation. Mm-hmm. That it's like there's an input and output going on at the same time. And I might write little quips as I'm going of like, okay, watch this, watch that, watch that. And so like notes, they can be an extension of translation in practice, but like also I'm not really looking at those notes to tell me what happened.
Yeah. You do make a good point though, because the way I used to take notes, and I don't take notes this way anymore actually because of you, is I would sometimes literally write word for word what I read. And like, this sentence makes a lot of sense. I want to remember this thing. And if I have a Kindle, I would copy it. And now when I take notes, because I still at night will take notes, I'll read and I'll take notes, but I just do the translation and quip in the note. So like, when it's a premise about, conversational sins from Ben Franklin, I'm going to write down like what I think about that, and then the quip. And then I do like put a link to like page number so I can go back to it. But it's a much better way of taking notes. But I never took notes that way. It was always just like notes would be just sort of reprinting a thing that I read, as opposed to, translating it into something I can understand. This show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Meez. Meez helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Meez is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Meez in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices, because Meez will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward, because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Meez podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Meez.
I think notes can be a versatile tool. I think the way people use notes a lot is basically like, if you imagine every thought, like every piece of information you have is a cardboard box, that people want to take what's inside the cardboard box and put it in the note. So then they carry around empty cardboard boxes. And the weird thing is, like, you aren't actually getting any benefit from carrying empty cardboard boxes around. Like that's just fake, and it's like not real knowledge. But notes don't have to just be unloading the components of the cardboard box somewhere else. Like, for instance, when I was preparing, I was doing a 60-minute talk on this inside of Hampton. And I, of all the retranslate Quip stuff, and I opened up my notebook, my paper notebook I have, right here. And I just wrote down everything, all the points I was going to hit. And I did this for 3 pages from memory without looking at anything else I had planned, at the slides, at nothing. And I would say that's a form of note taking to a certain extent. I never looked at those notes again because they weren't for me to reference to not remember. They were to prove to myself that I did remember. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I think there's a tactical way to sort of to use a note when you need to for a presentation, let's say. And then there's this way we're talking about, which is I'm using a note to do this, to emulate the same process that you're teaching, right? To translate and Quip and things like that. I do wish there was some way to take and index notes such that my brain could query them when needed. Do you know what I mean?
Because they will. Internal notes, not external notes.
Well, no, but even external notes, all the things I write down, I don't remember all the things. You know what I mean? And over the years, especially if you're an avid reader and you read lots of books, and I don't remember all of them. And maybe I just don't have a great memory, and or maybe I'm not doing enough of this of your process. But I've read and reread so many things that I wish I could query everything I've read and pull it up when I need for certain things, but I can't.
But you will create that internal indexing within your brain over time. That's honestly what quipping is. One of my students has a curiosity with how my mind works. So she asks me all these deeply introspective questions because I don't really visualize, I think, in the way that most people do. And she asked me Ellen, what does go on in your mind? What is happening? And I said, it was if you imagine a lake, and then under the water, there's a ball of light that's linked to all infinite balls of light. And inside the ball of light, there's a million little connections. I was it's you're in that ball of light and you're zooming around. And and when you hit one pinpoint, all the associated pinpoints light up at once. And you get to pick the one that you want, but it's all subconscious. And so that's how I experience information. And you could wonder, why did I end up like this? I sometimes guess it's how I talk, that I am super expressive about every single piece of information that enters my brain. And I've been that way since I was a baby. And so I've always had coded information going in to the point where it's all created this big matrix for me. But you can get there, but it's just fitness level or skill level and anything else that if you are trying to run a mile for the first time or the 80th time, you're not going to be quite as good as the person who's the 800th time.
It's so cool because you've kind of, this might be an over exaggeration, but you've kind of systematized and operationalized how to become super smart, right? Because that's basically
that's the goal.
A lot of intelligence is just being able to query the right information at the right time and synthesize it the way that you need. And, I'm learning what you just talked about at age 43, 42, whatever. I don't even know how old I am. But, man, start doing that practice early on. Everything that you learn, translate it into your own words and then create some sort of, analogy of Quip of what that is. use the right intonation so that it's, creating this energy in your body. Just do that over and over. Yeah, over the course of many years, it becomes, easier and more natural. And then you just start being able to, index all this information. It's really cool. I wish I had met you 20 years ago.
Well, one of our Hampton friends, he described my process really well. He was like, Ellen, it's not compression, it's indexing.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, man, good words. Because very often what people want is like, well, I want to go through faster with less effort, and I want to be able to get the smallest piece of information to, meet the minimum or whatever. And like, all of this is a sham. Like, I mean, I imagine it like, it has some value for some people. It's just not how I see the world as like, a productive way to be, but, people can be different. It's so funny to me, though, how people want to race to the bottom so hard, and they want to put so much energy into finding where the minimum is, all so that they don't have to do extra.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just all of the self-help for like the 5 ways to increase. I think of Ben Horowitz right now. There's no silver bullet, just a bunch of lead bullets.
It's true. I love Ben Horowitz for that reason.
Yeah. And it really, I do think indexing is like the key. I think, but also like just with advice, as a founder, as someone getting investing, all these things, I get so much advice. And I have this thing I tell myself of like, don't take anyone's advice, but index everyone's. And that's how I, like make decisions is like, even the people that I trust the most, their advice is just one other piece of data that gets indexed. And then I have to use all that information plus mine, plus experience to like make the 100%. Decision. And it's all about how well can you index all of that?
Yeah.
All that advice. So
like, I can tell you one good way to index advice in particular is when you get advice, immediately mentally apply it to your situation and guess what would happen.
Yeah.
And as soon as you do that application procedure, even if it's not, good, like, I mean, none of these insights have to be life-changing.
Yeah.
But the mere step of not just letting that advice die on the vine, but actually like listening to it, be like, okay, what does this really mean? Okay, got it. All right, how would that work? And that can happen in a split second, or you can have a whole conversation about it. That application step will make sure that it is truly integrated into, the mental web.
Yeah, I mean, I do find that I'm typically looking for advice for things that are more complex. And so my problem is, as I'm sure most, is it isn't easy to understand the impact of taking that advice because there's like these 50 downstream things that can happen, that you're trying to sort of understand that you probably haven't seen before. And that's part of why you're looking for the advice is that someone has done that already a couple times, but they've done it this way. And so playing it out becomes
that's
maybe
why
like
it doesn't
a 2 hour.
Have to be good. That's why it doesn't have to be good. Have that split second gut check of you can make it super simple. It could be like red, yellow, green, where it's like, and then a confidence interval, of okay, I'm at yellow on this, but I'm about 40% confident in that yellow. Even that, I would call that an application.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would grab all of the things you're like intrinsically feeling. And then you'll also get more used to listening to your intuition. Because even when we have these complex things, and like I have the same thing where people give me, advice about the structure of my business and all of this stuff that, I know a lot more complexities of the situation than the person giving the advice. And so I'm always like, well, but even if the only thing I did was like, that's a red, and I'm 100 that it's a red, I feel like that would help me retain the advice way more. And then also, index it against other similar sorts of advice. Or it's like, that's a green, but I'm at about 2% on that green.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. Okay. Quick question. What's Portfolia? It looks like it's sort of venture fund that you're involved with.
So I'm an LP in the Portfolia Venture Fund. It's a fund like basically women VCs, and it's not only women who are in it, but women VCs are LPs in it, and they invest in primarily women founded or like women missioning businesses. But I'm just an LP. I went to their conference and it's like a lovely group of people, but I've been doing a fair amount of angel investing since I got into Hampton, which has been really fun.
That's awesome. Is it a pretty fresh fund or has it been around? Do they have another fund they're raising?
It's been around for a minute. I got into it actually through South by Southwest. I was at South by Southwest and I met one of the general partners in the mentoring session at South by Southwest. And she was telling me about it and I just decided to do it. And they have pretty low min check size. So it's a good way, I think, to learn by doing when it comes to investing. And I'm really passionate, especially about like women and underrepresented founders in general joining the investing cohort, just because I think that's like how a lot of positive changes will happen is by different sorts of people being the ones who control the money. And so I always want to like, live that and also try and encourage other people in similar sorts of positions to do the same, just to uplift others who need that investment.
Yeah. When I was taking a look, there was some food investments as well. I saw Omni on there. Is there a particular vertical that they're going after? Is it really any women-owned business? Or?
It's not all women-owned. And sometimes like the food and ag tech fund that I'm in, it's not all women mission businesses. There's like a femtech fund and stuff like that as well. But I think it's more the LP pool that's like primarily women.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But I think they're just like looking for things that are like new and innovative in food and ag tech. But they've had some really interesting stuff that it's interesting to listen to, the calls and stuff like that.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. I ask this question a lot for some reason. Actually, why I ask it is because I was at a Hampton retreat and the facilitator asked it to us in our groups. And it was just really like, it stuck with me. Because it's a great way to sort of understand your true sort of like personal values. So I don't know if you remember this, but you weren't at that retreat, but you've probably been at other events. Anyways, what makes you really, really angry? Like blood boiling angry?
People who break my trust. Definitely.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, given,
yeah.
How does it manifest?
I'm not somebody who blows up at people. So like it's like it internalizes and feeds this like, like hot metal in a fire that's like bubbling iron, just like in my chest, this like bubbling iron that then externalizes and cools and creates even more of an exoskeleton. Then it's like, I'm never going to let someone do this to me again, but in the moment, the way I cope with it is I'm uber professional.
Yeah.
I will be like, absolutely. And I hear your concern 100%. Thank you for bringing that to me. All right. So let's work on action steps. Like my voice goes like that. It's actually a really big tell that, now I'm giving away.
All right.
Because it's like, I can't give them the privilege of seeing how much they've hurt me.
Yeah.
And I always say how I really feel is a privilege. If you don't earn that privilege, and I give everybody the privilege starting off, but if you decide to sacrifice it.
Do you start with a level of a lot of trust?
Yeah.
Meaning, are you a very trusting person?
I'm an extremely trusting person. And that's also part of the problem. Is I love individual people so much and I want to help individual people so much. And like, me, you see me in Hampton, I'm constantly trying to help this, that, and the other person all the time. And I just want to, I want to love on people and help people a lot. It's just who I am. And I'm with open arms for all these like individual people. But I'm very skeptical of quote, people in general and groups. So it's like, then it's like, oh, well, you know how people are. But then when one of those people that I've, opened my arms to shows me that they have betrayed my trust and they do not value me and they are walking all over me thinking it's nice, Ellen, and you can get away with anything, then it's like, and you're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think I've spent my whole life trying to find people who won't do that to me.
Yeah. How big is your team at your company?
Well, so it's interesting. I am the only one you can book tutoring with on the website, but we do have a growing team of contractors, and I actually just hired an executive assistant in Egypt who is starting on Monday, which I'm very excited about. She seems absolutely fantastic. I'm really, really excited. But
we can have a sidebar about that, by the way, because it took a while for me to figure out how to use my website.
No, for real. It's hard, but I'm hopeful. I've been doing a lot of prep work, but we've got a team of 3 LSAT people who work on a contract basis for different versions of helping with the LSAT, whether it's responding to videos, contributing on our Slack channel, who they all do really fantastic work. And then I have a fractional operations person who helps me with the book publishing business. And so it's growing to be a team of maybe 4 or 5 contractors, but I'm the only W-2.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a conversation. I don't remember when it was like, it was a podcast episode like 8 weeks ago or something with a really, really incredible CEO of this other food tech company. And they've been around for quite a while, very successful. And he said, fast forward 10 years, one thing he learned is like, especially on his executive team, everyone starts at like a battery level of half trust, 50% trust. And they have to sort of get to 100. I've always been sort of the opposite of like, you get everything and then it sort of works backwards. But I'm starting to think, that's not necessarily the best way. But I'm curious how you think about that for your business.
I think that your friend is probably right that it isn't the best way, but I just don't know how to be other than that. Because especially it's with hiring for LSAT that these people are my former students who obviously, if I'm hiring them, I think they're really, really good and I'm close to them. We've had their dreams come true together. It's a long-standing, like years-long relationship, and I want them to succeed so badly that I probably am, in the past at least, not commenting on anybody who's currently there, but people from the past have been guilty of putting on rose-colored glasses and hoping so much that these people I, care about as students will thrive as people who contribute to the mission. And that has then made me be blind to issues.
Yeah.
I think I'm much better with operational people. Much better.
Yeah, I think me too. But the thing that I realized with the whole sort of trust thing with folks is it's almost never the personal trust I'm worried about that I have an issue with, but I will give too much sort of runway of like, I trust that you can do this job.
Yes.
100%. When realistically, there's all this historical information and empirical data that you just don't know about what's happened that will allow you to do the job better. And sort of that like, I do, we do, you do, approach to getting folks, onboarded is taking it for granted, but I think it's actually really important. I don't know how that like translate to friends and relationships, but I find that like I have to sort of like, take back some of that quote unquote trust, for their benefit more than mine.
No, definitely true. And I've also been guilty of that, of being like, well, you got a 175, which is, the 99th percentile on the LSAT, and you studied with me for a year. Of course, you know everything. And that's not fair to them. You know, like it shouldn't be like that. I think I've been guilty of being overwhelmed with everything I'm trying to do and then just wanting it to be this like magic pill that they're going to be able to do all of that. And then it's like, actually, Ellen, no, it won't be. But I imagine in a kitchen, it's probably this on steroids, right? But so visible, the errors.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's so many things going on at once that it's tough and that's why it's so important to have, really good recipes, really good process, because especially nowadays, there's not as many, folks that are as experienced when they come into your kitchen. And so you have to be really dialed in with exactly how you want something done. You have to be far more explicit than implicit. Otherwise, it just won't get, every little thing adds up to the sum of its parts in a kitchen, and it can very quickly turn into food that is not what you wanted it to be or service. And you have to sort of start on the opposite side where like just assume almost nothing when you come in, right? And assume that of the team member. There's a restaurant called La Bernardin in New York City. Very famous chef named Eric Appert. And he's had this philosophy they've been open for 20 plus years. One of the best restaurants in the world. No matter who you are, no matter how much experience, you always start at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I think it's been his premise since day one. I think it's worked out well for him. So.
Oh, that's what I do at Elemental too. And I recently actually, I had somebody who came in and was already in the 99th percentile. And I've taught a lot of students who they come and they want the perfect score. And I told him in the intro call, I was like, you're not going to be able to skip ahead. And the benchmark at Elemental is you have to be able to read and translate and quip a logical reasoning section, which is 25 questions, like 25 little paragraphs in 20 minutes. And I was like, you're going to have to pass the translation benchmarks just like everybody else. Like, is that something you're willing to do? Is that something you want to do? Because if you don't, like, this isn't the right place for you. And he was like, that is why I am here.
Oh,
That's what I want. And I was like, oh man, you're awesome. Come on in. But I think it's very powerful that certain people don't get different privileges than someone else. Everybody has to pass the exact same foundational benchmark because it also unifies the community.
Exactly.
Everybody knows everybody else there has had to do this exact same tough goal.
Yeah, well, and it also can just sort of coalesce the way in which you want things done, right? You know that everybody is on the same playing field of how they think or how they approach things. So
yeah.
So your business is growing really well. It's pretty. But by the way, congrats! It's awesome. I'm curious if I don't know if you ever think about this, but like if you had unlimited capital, unlimited resources, unlimited time, like what would you be doing differently today? Is there something else you would do or a way that you would do things?
I would still teach students. I'd probably fire people faster, which maybe that's a good note for me that I should do that anyway. But I would hire a CEO and an operational people, so I never had to deal with someone's billing ever again. I never had to think about whether somebody got the contract ever again. That would be totally outside my life. And I would teach 4 to 6 hours a day in my one-on-ones, helping my kids, and when I say kids, I mean people who are aged 21 to 60. Helping my kids and seeing and being in the lab. I love making new things. I make new things all the time in my teaching. And so Elemental is always changing and growing, and there's always new drills, new things coming to light. So I would never want to lose that, but I would have, this magic ops team. They would also have a team of software developers, so I wouldn't have so many technological hurdles because I invented an asynchronous digital learning technology to train translation. And it's being a non-technical founder, especially one who, works all the time already in session, makes it very challenging to get those sorts of projects to the level that you want them to be. And so I, throw a bunch of money in there so that I could have a really, really good software platform that asynchronously teaches translation of the way I want.
Very cool. What would it look like to do some of that, like in the next 6 months? How could you get some of that done sooner?
I mean, I am. So thanks to a lot of support in Hampton, if anyone from Hampton listens to it, they know who they are, who have supported me in making me raise my tutoring rate. I doubled my tutoring rate in January to February, and with the goal of maintaining the same revenue and cut the hours. And so I will go down to that 4 to 6 hours a day that I was just talking about, and then have time for creative projects and, managing people who actually can do this sort of stuff. And then in addition, I'm starting a Bubble subscription platform where I actually recently got really into Coda, this new, it's like a version, it's kind of like Notion, but I think a lot better.
Yeah.
And
cool.
I'm getting really excited about putting a version of my book, The Loophole. So The Loophole is my LSAT book that teaches all this stuff I've been talking about into Coda and doing it behind a Bubble paywall as a multimedia subscription. And then I can add in all kinds of cool shit. I can have videos, I can have interactive AI quizzes, I can edit it, I can add supplements. It could be this really cool version of the book. And that's happening
that's awesome
now. So it's all on the way, because my goal for 2024 is I want my non-tutoring revenue to be equal to my tutoring revenue without decreasing the tutoring revenue to jam the goal. And so the more non-Ellen's time products, also the more equitable the company, because then those will be less expensive, and there'll be ways a lot of people can get more help. The more I see myself as pushing this all forward. And so it's called Living Flashcards, is the asynchronous learning technology that I think once I have this Bubble subscription platform up, and I also will be selling subscriptions to the various proprietary answer keys I have and all my videos and all of that. Once that's in and I have some developers I can trust, then we'll head back over to the Living Flashcards of it all. Because right now it does exist as a web app. It's just that it can only have 50 people at a time. It doesn't scale because it was made jankily. Yeah.
I love that. And I love Coda. I agree. It's a great platform.
Okay. Where are the Coda loyalists out there? Because I need to post in Hampton. I was so surprised how good it is, and no one talks about it.
Yeah, I think Notion gets a lot more play than Coda, and I don't know why. They're both really good. Coda's, more document than and Notion is more databasey. But yeah, I don't know why.
Right? It's so robust. The packs of how you can bring over and connect so many systems. Like I'm an Airtable shop. So like my whole business is an Airtable. I'm obsessed with Airtable. I'm not leaving Airtable, but Coda feels like the midpoint between Notion and Airtable to me in like a really positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and if you ever want to talk about developers, happy to.
Oh, please.
We do a lot of those. So what's like the next 5 years for you? I now hear what the next 6 months is, but like, do you have an idea of like what the next, big phase of what you're doing is?
So, I always in my head answer that question with still hating this question. No shade to you, but I always feel like I would be closing myself off to so much possibility if I constrained my version of 5 years from now to my current understanding of the world.
That's actually the answer that I always hope for that people don't say, because I do it on purpose actually, because whenever like I don't think that way, but a lot of people do. It's like, okay, the business will be here and I'll be doing this thing, and I'm also a big fan of Jason Fried. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
And just planning 6 weeks at a time is like the world changes so much.
Yes.
That this idea of this waterfall, like here's what 5 years from now will look like. Now I feel bad because I feel like now everybody's going to know how to answer this thing. The world changes, right? So I promise whatever you say in 5 years, it's probably not like 5 years ago, I don't think, maybe 6 years ago, I would have never said I'm going to have a tech company. And, 8 years before that, I would have never said I'm going to have a hot dog business or something. Like shit changes, and I think, I think more like, what does the next 3 months look like? And what am I going to accomplish, and then, because that's tangible. The one thing I will say is like, some sort of North Star of, I know I want to have sort of like my generational wealth for my kids. I know that's a thing that has to happen, and that I can, feel like I've left like the industry I'm in better than when I started. Other than that, it's about it.
100%. Like I have that North Star of, I always say, I want to teach the world to read and think. And I want to show people that ceilings are imaginary. And how I do that is going to be so subject to a million unpredictable things. Like 5 years ago, the loophole had just come out. I was like 3 or 4 months into being an LSAT celebrity. I had no idea I could ever even have the dream of being on this podcast with you right now. Like, I had no idea what my life could be, how good my life could be. I was in a way worse situation then than I am now. And like, I would never want to trade where I am today for 2019 Ellen's wildest dreams.
Yeah. And also just knowing a little bit about how that all went down, because we never know what tomorrow brings. Like Reddit existed then. And I think if Reddit didn't exist, who knows what would have happened, right? You had this huge audience of people that could like talk about a thing and talk about your book and share it with other people, and that spread very quickly. But if there wasn't a place for it to spread from, it might the timing happened to work that way. So something else like Reddit or something completely different might exist in 2 years that changes the whole trajectory of how you think. So I totally agree. I'm so glad you answered the question that way.
Yes, I'm glad I gave my honest answer and I didn't try and give you some kind of bullshit about OKRs.
I will say I've screwed up OKRs 100 times, maybe 100, and they typically 99% of the time don't work. And OKRs are kind of like the ketogenic diet. I always say this, like they're either like amazing if you do it absolutely right and everything culturally is aligned and your company all follows this thing. But if you're off by like 1%, like if it's not completely like culturally embedded in your world, then it's actually terrible. Or if you're not ready to be able to set those kinds of objectives. But if you can actually accomplish it, I think it's really, a great way to align everybody into a unified goal and be very clear about like a KPI. They also, they're not 5-year OKRs, right? They're, 3-6 months. So anyways, apart from technical issues and the earthquake that we had this morning, we literally, I can't believe we had an earthquake in Brooklyn this morning. This was awesome.
No, thank you. I loved it. You clearly know my story so well, and I appreciate all of the research that you guys did. This is phenomenal.
Well, I mean, you're taking the time to be here, so I wanted to make sure I took the time to not have you reiterate things that you've already said a bunch of times.
Oh, I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate it immensely because it's so fun to be able to, work from a shared foundation.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep chatting in the Hampton channel. And I hope that everybody that listened to this can now start reading,
Retranslate
translating, and quipping and learning.
And reach out. Like I have a newsletter. I'm on TikTok.
Oh, cool. Yeah. How do people find you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm LSAT Ellen on TikTok. And so you can find me over there. That'll have a link tree to everything else. Or you can go to ellencassidy.com. You can go to elementalprep.com.
And the book is Loophole.
The Loophole in LSAT Logical Reasoning. And so, yes, it has LSAT in the title. That was so people could search LSAT and find it. But not my favorite for the music of the title. But there is a lot in there about what we just talked about. And so if anyone's curious, I'm always happy to chat, especially for people who are not in LSAT and want to learn these sorts of methodologies. Like, y'all are my new laboratory, and I really want to build things for you. And so if you want this kind of thing to be built for you, reach out.
Amazing. I love it. Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.